Hello everyone, welcome in. I don't know what day you're seeing us on. It will be either Happy Wednesday or Happy Sunday. I hope everyone is well. It's so nice to have you here. I've decided to sit down and film a little bit of an impromptu video discussing my favourite reads of 2024. If you don't know me, if this is your first time coming across a video of mine, welcome. My name's Charlotte. I read 83 books in 2024. I have a BookTok account and I also do a little bit of vlogging as well. If you're a returning viewer, thanks so much for coming back. It's nice to see you. So I was going to film a really big reading wrap up video because I'm a data girly. I love the data, and last year I did one that was like a Spotify wrapped based off my information off Storygraph. And you know what, I opened Canva and I just thought I really cannot be bothered. Because last year I did it all when I was on the plane. I had like a 13-hour flight, so I was just doing it all on there. There was not else a lot to do other than read. And I watched a couple of people's videos that were their favourite books for 2024, and I thought, you know what? I'd really like to do something like that. So alas, here we are. My head keeps bumping into this plant slightly. Maybe I could put that there. And let me grab my drink, and then I can put my drink there. Right, much better. So yeah, I just figured it made more sense for me to talk about my 5-star reads. I am going to discuss a little bit of like the stats information, just so you can get an insight into what I read, a bigger picture and overview in 2024, especially if you don't know me. I think it's quite interesting. And I'm not going to lie, I do love the stats on Storygraph. That's like the main reason I'm on there, to be honest. They do a 2024 reading wrap up of all your stats. I love that kind of information. So we're just going to have a quick whiz through them before I start talking about what my favourite reads were. Like I mentioned earlier, I read 83 books this year. The genres I spent the most time with in 2024, I'm really proud of myself for changing up my genre. The genre in the lead is contemporary fiction, and I read 32 books that were marked as contemporary. Following up the rear is fantasy with 28 books. And what's funny is I feel like I haven't read a lot of fantasy this year. I think I read loads last year. Fantasy was at the top spot for me last year. And it wasn't that I was disappointed in myself, but I think last year I read a lot of fantasy that wasn't very good quality, and this year I started doing the same, and I said to myself after that, I only want to read quality fantasy books. I was reading a lot of what I would consider a palate cleanser book, which is just something to kind of get the numbers up, to go a bit head empty between my serious books. So when I say I don't feel like I read a lot of fantasy this year, I obviously did, but I think I read less fantasy in the second half of the year than I did in the first half of the year. Following in at a close third with 27 books is romance. I expected this of myself, to be honest. I do love a romance read. Again, like I am with fantasy, I'm being a bit more choice with my romance this year. I made better decisions with my romance in 2024 than I previously had done. Oh look, sorry, you can see that my jeans are undone. Let me tuck that away. Coming in fourth is literary with 26 books, literary fiction. I do think I branched out my reading this year a little bit, and that shows with literary. And then the last category was LGBTQIA plus fiction with 13 books. In 2024, I really wanted to read more LGBTQIA plus books. I read a lot of romance in 2023, and it wasn't very diverse romance. The same with a lot of fantasy. I picked up a lot of books that I didn't realise were LGBT until I read them, and I really enjoyed them. By nature, in 2024 and in the start of 2025, a lot of the books I'm gravitating towards are queer fiction, books with main characters that are part of the LGBTQ community. So yeah, those were the genres I spent the most time with in 2024. The average length of books I read was 360 pages, and it took me around 12 days to finish each book. I know that there is some averages dragged down in there, and I'm so happy that Storygraph have introduced a pause feature on books, because my averages will no longer be shot this year. I stuck with some books for a really long time. My average rating of 2024 was 3.46 stars. Now, if you've watched any of my videos before, you know I do a monthly reading wrap up. In this monthly reading wrap up, I don't tend to give book star ratings for a multitude of reasons. I previously did, and honestly, I feel like it's a system that doesn't work very well for me. When I was reviewing books on YouTube, I found it really, really difficult to assign star ratings, because obviously throughout the year, it becomes relative the more books you read, and I just felt like it was a bit of a fallible system, and I didn't really trust myself to rate them. However, on my Storygraph, I do, because I still like memorialising my excellent reads with 5 stars. So all I'm saying is, if you do see those reviews, take them with a pinch of salt. I find it quite hard to review anything between like 2 and 4 stars. It's so subjective, isn't it? I know a lot of people don't do star ratings. So without further ado, let's get into my 5-star reads. It's worth mentioning, of course, that all of these are subjective. My 5-star read might not be your 5-star read. For me, a 5-star read is a book that I've really, really enjoyed, and I've felt like all aspects of it have just been amazing. With this in mind, I know that you can enjoy a book and it not be well written. You can think it's the best book ever. I've tried to not do that for my 5-star reads. I've tried to go with books that I feel like they're well written, or they at least feel well written to me, because otherwise there would be a lot more 5 stars. There's so many books that I have loved that I objectively know are bad books, or books that I've devoured, I've read them up really quickly, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're good books. So yeah, just bear that in mind. I am going to try give a brief synopsis on them and tell you a little bit about why I liked them. This is in absolutely no like chronological order or order of rating. These are just ones that I'm seeing as they're coming up. My 5-star reads on my story graph. One of my favourites this year was A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck. So our main character, Soren Johansson, he's a family man, he's a geologist, and he's also a Mormon. He finds himself in hell. Hell is not what he was expecting, and hell in this iteration of it is a vast library, and the only way that he can get out of hell and escape and move on is if he finds the book that contains the story of his life. This is a short book coming in at about 100 pages, and I would really, really recommend reading it. I really love a book that leaves me with more questions than answers, and this one did that for me. I've seen some people class as horror. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I personally wouldn't put it into the horror genre by any stretch of the imagination, but I can say that it is a short existential book with philosophical and religious themes. It's a bit wacky, it's a bit weird, it's a bit wonderful. It does leave you with a bit of a strange sense of dread throughout. I just absolutely love the concept of this endless, bottomless library. This book had a very big impact on me, which I think is why it's one of my favourite reads of the year and why it's 5 stars, because this is the kind of book that I just couldn't stop thinking about for a couple of days, and I think I will revisit this once a year. Easily revisit it once a year because it's so punchy, it's so easy to read. I'm really excited for my reread of it to see how the themes feel different to me this time around. I've also come to notice that I really enjoy a book where a religious main character kind of unpicks and unprograms themselves from everything they knew about that religion. And that's not a criticism on religion, because I grew up religious, but I love it when we have our main character's worldview challenged. This is philosophical enough and existential enough that it stuck with me, but it didn't leave me feeling doom and gloom. Down the Drain by Julia Fox was up there with my 5-star reads. So I listened to this on audiobook, which I think personally added a lot to the experience for me. I don't have much of a synopsis other than that it is Julia Fox's memoir. I didn't really know a lot about her beyond what I'd seen of her kind of viral sound bites on TikTok, but I kind of love a memoir, you know. Who am I to rate a memoir badly when it's your life? It was so entertaining. I felt like I learned so much about her. The way she tells the story in this dry, like valley girl accent is amazing. She's lived such an intense life of honestly such terrible loss, but also intense stardom. And I feel like the way she narrates it, it feels very authentic. It feels like it's delivered in the way that she wants me to receive it, if that makes sense. I just found it so compelling. She has such a visceral, horrible way of describing sexual acts that meant I was kind of horrified, but I couldn't stop listening. Yeah, I just think it's really worth a listen. I read this quite early on in the year, so I'm not sure, but it still might be on Spotify. That's where I listened to it. A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This book rocked my fucking socks. Historical fantasy, historical queer fantasy about Dracula's wife, retold in the format of letters. I feel like I've not done that justice. Constanta is rescued by Dracula and turned undead into his undead bride. They exist in passion for many, many years, and slowly Dracula begins to introduce more consorts into their family, and she begins to realise, you know, maybe things aren't quite how I'd like them. There is not a single word in this book that is not meant to be there. Everything is so deliberate, so well placed, so opulent. The letter format is so captivating. The dynamics between Constanta and Dracula's other lovers, they basically all live together in like one big polyamorous relationship, polycule, exploring the dynamics of the relationships between them and Dracula, the relationships between Constanta and the other woman, Constanta and the man and the woman. Oh, it is just so interesting to read. It's a book that's quite frankly nothing short of obsessive, and one thing about me is I love obsessive love. Short and sweet too. It's coming in at only 292 pages. I know I've already said this, but the language and the writing, just wow. Sapphic yearning, check. Jealousy to love, check. A centuries old vampire with lots of red flags. Check. What I would give, genuinely, to read this book again for the first time. The best books, I feel, have come out of left field, and I've not read them with any expectation of how good they would be for me. And that was definitely the case with Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. Sci-fi, what's considered a classic, I believe, but I don't know if it's like old enough to be considered a classic, but a classic nonetheless. Charlie Gordon has been born with an incredibly low IQ, probably what we would know now to be a learning disability. He's been selected as a candidate for experimental surgery, which scientists believe could possibly raise his IQ and increase his intelligence. The surgery has already been successful on a lab mouse called Algernon, and as Charlie's intelligence begins to increase, he begins to surpass everyone around him in his life, and things change for him quite drastically. As Algernon starts to deteriorate, Charlie begins to wonder what will become of him. Oh my god, I got so many messages about this book when I started reading it. I completely understand why it's as popular as it is. I do think out of all of the books that I've read this year, this is the one that stuck with me the longest. I couldn't stop thinking about this for days and weeks after I finished this. I was feeling quite neutral reading this about halfway through, and then just a vast array of emotions snuck up on me. It's like giving me goosebumps talking about it. The reader's relationship with Charlie as well, and how we feel about him as he kind of starts off as this very sweet, very naive boy, really, operating in the body of a man. He becomes more cold, more callous, more calculated, and we kind of start to get this disdain for him as his intelligence peaks and he becomes this unlikable man. He's smarter than everyone around him. He gains this kind of pity for everyone who is not as clever with him. No one can keep up with him. And then we just get this descent back to it. It's very uncomfortable reading, and I think it's uncomfortable acknowledging your relationship to Charlie change and how you feel about Charlie's character. This is a 5-star read purely for the level of impact it had on me. I don't even know if I'd ever reread this. I don't know if I'd class it as a favourite book, but the way that this was written, I cannot deny that it was impactful. There is just so much to think about after you finish it. There was something I highlighted in this book I don't highlight very often, so I'll read it to you. I don't know what's worse, to not know what you are and be happy, or to become what you've always wanted to be and feel alone. In the context of the book, chills. Changing path and genre quickly, my next 5-star read was Book Lovers by Emily Henry, which is a romance. Our main character Nora is a literary agent. Her whole life is books. She is not the typical romance heroine she often reads about, and she decides that she wants to be, so she visits Sunshine Falls with her sister. She's convinced she's going to have a run-in with like a hot small town bartender, you know, a cashier, that kind of thing, hot dad, handsome countryman, but she keeps bumping into her nemesis from the city, Charlie, again and again and again. Again, this one kind of caught me out of left field because I think before reading this, I'd only read one Emily Henry book, Beach Read, and I really didn't like it that much. It was okay. It was just like firmly middle ground for me. I think in this one, I just really fell in love with the characters. Like I really loved Nora. I really loved Charlie. I think it takes quite a lot for me to love a romance book such as this one now. And there was just something about the combination of it all that was great characters, great sex scenes, great emotional impact. Like it heartwarmed me. With Emily Henry books, I always like there's emphasis on other relationships outside the romantic ones. It gives the characters just a bit more density and a bit more bite. So we had Nora's relationship with her sister, Nora's sister's relationship with her husband. For once, the banter and the quickness and the wit between the main characters felt natural. It felt intelligent. It didn't feel forced. It felt like repartee between two intelligent characters. It didn't feel stilted, in which a lot of romance, like witty banter, does. It was easy and natural. Obviously, in a lot of romance books, miscommunication is a huge part of the plot devices, a huge part of the plot driver. A lot of the times we wouldn't have this kind of like third act breakup without a little bit of miscommunication, which is usually why I get so frustrated at romance books. But I think it just depends on how you do the miscommunication, and I can't quite remember what it was in Book Lovers, but I remembered it was okay enough and I enjoyed the other aspects of the book enough for me to kind of like overlook this. I just really love them as a couple. I just really loved this book. To me, it felt like a comfort movie or a comfort book, you know, like a nice warm hug. And actually, you know what? I haven't really enjoyed as many of the other Emily Henry books as I thought I would following this one. Nothing has knocked this one out the top spot for me. Migrations by Charlotte McConaughey. Literary fiction, slight dystopian elements to it. The world is on the brink of catastrophe. All animals are are about to die out. They've all been going for quite a long time. The seas are empty. Everything's nearly gone. That's quite a small element of the book, but Franny Stone, our main character, is on a journey to document the last flight of Arctic terns. They're nearly extinct, and she smuggles aboard a trawler ship in Greenland and persuades the crew to take her on board so that she can follow this last flight. There's a lot more to it than that, though. That sounds really, reductive. This is one of the most emotional books I've read in 2024. Franny is the kind of character who is meant to love, but she is not meant to stay, and nothing gets my heart like a wandering woman, a woman who's nomadic, a woman that cannot be tied down. You know, those kinds of women that it is cruel to pin them down, it's cruel to ask them to stay in one place, they need to wander. She loves birds, and the birds she loves have started to disappear, and we just start to unravel a bit more of her story. And yes, while I agree with some of the criticism about the dystopian element of it, could have been a little bit further explored, because why is the fact that all animals are about to die not a bigger part of the book? Yes, I can agree that there should be some more emphasis on that, but first and foremost, this is an emotional journey rather than a dystopian book. That is kind of just like a plot driver. The flashbacks back and forth about Franny's past are so intense. I devoured this book. It just creeps up on you. It just really creeps up on you. There is this looming, mounting sense of dread, which is quite a popular theme between all my 5-star reads, but there is this emotional rising. It was entirely a chest book for me. I just couldn't believe it. And when I say I couldn't believe it, I meant I couldn't believe the level of emotional impact this book had on me, and that I finished it at 1 a.m. and ugly cried in bed, trying not to wake Doug. One of my mutuals online also read this and also had her shit rocked by this book too. If you want to cry, if you want a good, purging, headache-inducing, snot-filled cry, read this book. I love birds too. Birds are such a passion of mine, so that really resonated with me. I think a lot about her character really resonated with me in a way that I don't really care to examine, because I would not consider us one and the same, but that's just a level of self-analysis that I don't think I'm quite ready for yet. There is something of the wild woman in Franny that I think a lot of women will resonate with, actually, whether you consider yourself a soul destined to wander or a soul destined to stay put. There is something about Franny that is just so raw. Oh, again, this is one of those books what I would give to read it for the first time again. I want the BBC to adapt it into a 6-part drama, please. If you read this book because of me and you actually don't like it, I actually just don't want to hear it. Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert, which is book 3 in the Brown Sisters series. This is another purely enjoyment 5-star rating. I really enjoyed the series overall. Eve Brown is a hot mess. She's always flitting from business to business. She's always taking on passion project after passion project. She ruins a client's wedding in one of her said businesses, and her parents draw the line. They've been supporting her. She's the youngest of the Brown sisters. She needs to get out there, get a job, prove herself. She shows up at an Airbnb that needs a chef, and Jacob, the owner of the Airbnb, is a control freak, and Eve's in a job. I would really recommend the Brown Sisters trilogy to anyone that just loves a bit of light-hearted romance. A light-hearted romance where women are just allowed to love, where it's not too serious, it's not too deep, and it's quite spicy. She is very consistent in her writing of lovable characters, great sex scenes, and witty English humour. I felt so connected to Eve, which I think is why I enjoyed this book so much. It just tugged on my little heartstrings, you know. There's an element of both characters being neurodivergent and being on their neurodivergency discovery journey, ADHD, autism, or ADHD. My heart breaks for her a little in the beginning, because she is just a woman that wants to find her way, and at our core, aren't we all? I think that's probably why I liked this so much, as this resonates with me so deeply as someone who is also neurodivergent. And to see a neurodivergent woman of colour be loved, and be loved loudly, it just is going to do it for me. Jacob, our main character, being autistic and having autism represented to us as a desirable main character male lead is just something that's usually underrepresented. Neurodivergent people have the capacity to be an appealing romantic lead, and for their neurodivergency, their ADHD, their autism to be a main important part of it, but not be the main issue, you know? It just made me feel a little bit moved, I think, having that representation. This book specifically, I enjoyed it so much. It was such a fun, cozy read. Their chemistry was really tangible, and that's why it kind of got knocked into this 5-star park for me, because out of all 3 of the books, which I really enjoyed, this one I just loved, and it's probably something to do with how it resonated for me. I love love. It's set in a B&B. It's really super cozy. It's just Delightful. Manacled by Senlin Yu. This is a fan fiction. This is a Draco and Hermione fan fiction, and this has been taken off AO3 now because it's being published into a book this year. And when I tell you, I didn't want to put this on there, but I feel like it's necessary. I've said this about all the books, but this really stuck with me. My best friend has read this now, and this is basically all we talk about. Right, let me just run through a little synopsis of you. Roll your eyes if you want. It's my first ever fan fiction I've ever read, and by God did I pick a big one. This is 1,500 pages. I read it in 7 days and I was traumatized. This is a fan fiction set in the Harry Potter universe. Harry Potter is dead. DEAD. In the aftermath of the war, Voldemort has set up a magical repopulation program that's exactly as awful as it sounds. Hermione Granger has an order secret buried deep in the recesses of her mind, and she has also been sold into slavery as part of this magical breeding program. She is sent as one of these surrogates to Voldemort's right-hand man, the High Reeve, because once she's pregnant, he can access the secret deep in her mind. Oh my God, I just don't even know how to summarize this book. So if you want to go watch my very, very, very long review on this, go to the October Reads on my page, October Reads 2024, and you'll get my full thoughts of this, because I'm not going to give this to you right now. You don't deserve it. You're here for my 5-star reads, not for a Manacled review. Check content warnings, but this book, I'm not even that big of a Harry Potter fan, I just don't even want to discuss the author of the original Harry Potter books on this channel, because I don't even want to give her the time of day. I don't want to pay her mind. She's quite frankly disgusting, but a little fan fiction I'll try. Yeah, I just don't know what to say other than that I enjoyed it so much. I'm not sure I will ever read it again because of how traumatizing I think this book was to read. I will probably reread Alchemize. I wasn't planning to. Alchemize is going to be the published version. Obviously, all of the intellectual property of the Harry Potter world will have been scrubbed out. It will have been rewritten. But a lot of very popular books are fanfics, originated as fanfics. I think what I liked so much about this book is right before I was reading it, end of summer vibes, I said, I need to read a book with a romance that transcends universes, time and space. I need a romance that is passionate. I need a romance that is devastating. I need a romance that is heartbreaking. I need a kind of love that transcends dimensions, and I need one that is quite frankly devastating. I want yearning. I want the kind of love where they are destined to be together, but the universe is destined to rip them apart. I didn't want an easy love. This book fell into my lap, and unfortunately it delivered. And there are two people. There is the person that I am before I read Manacled, and there is the person that I am now after reading Manacled. And that's pretty much all I'll say about it. I read 1,500 pages in 7 days. It was the most immersive thing I've read in a really, really long time. This book gets a 5 stars solely based on the emotional impact it had on me and what it wrung out of me and what scrap of a soul it left me with. It's very dark. It's very uncomfortable reading. I would please really, really recommend you check your... Oh, sorry, there's a bug. Check your trigger warnings, check your content warnings. Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wang. This is a fantasy book and it's set in the city of Tiran. Tiran is a very industrial, modern, haven of a city, this utopian type city that is reliant solely on magic. Magic is run by the High Mages, the High Magistry, and our orphan main character, Siona. She has been studying her whole life for the magic exam. Basically, she ends up being the first woman in history that's ever permitted to join the High Magistry as a High Mage. The glamour is slowly fading as she realises the cost of magic. I loved this book so much. To me, it was very reminiscent of Babel by R.F. Kuang. If you've read that, very similar vibes in terms of there is a lot of discussion about social class, about misogyny, about racism, about how you can uphold oppression even if you are an oppressed person in that system, and the importance of intersectionality, but also an amazing, well-crafted, thought-out magic system that, quite frankly, knocked my fucking socks off. An imperfect female character, a frenzied woman. We start to watch her unspool as she kind of starts having all these realizations about the city she lives in, the society she supposedly loves. It's a standalone book with a perfect ending that feels true to the book, and that's what I respected so much about that. I just absolutely loved it. I wasn't sure how I felt about it when I finished, which is why I've given it initially a 4.5. I said it was was near perfect, but actually when I sat down, I filmed my December review, which should be up by now actually, so sorry if this sounds like a repeat, but I sat there and I spoke about it and I realised actually this was a 5-star book for me. I just didn't know how to feel once I finished it. Tea. And then I think this is my last 5-star. It was Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson, and it was my first Sanderson read, and it was fantasy. I realise I've not said the genre for every single book, so I apologise, but hopefully you've gotten a kind of grasp of what it is. I reviewed this fairly recently, but Tress lives a simple, uncomplicated life on her simple, uncomplicated island in the middle of the Emerald Sea. Her friend Charlie is whisked away by his rich father to find a bride, and unfortunately he doesn't return. Tress is in love with him, so she takes matters into her own hands and stows away on a ship off the island, which people don't do. People don't generally do that. And she kind of commits to a life of piracy in order to get her man back. This book was a warm hug of a whimsical grown-up fairy tale, and my first Sanderson, and I was very intimidated in reading this, and I just enjoyed it so much. It was really a delight to read. The fantasy and the magic element felt very organic and like earth-driven, which is what I often much prefer compared to like urban fantasy, industrial magic. I love like earth-driven magic. I love organic magic systems, and yeah, this really delivered on that front. Light-hearted banter, kind of young adult-y, but not in a way that I didn't like, because I don't usually like young adult books. Just all of the kind of things that you love, that give you the warm hugs. It was just a warm hug of a book. I would definitely reread this again. I wish I'd read this when I was younger, because this would be one of those books that I ended up rereading all the time. It was just lovely. It felt really accessible. It wasn't too long. I felt like it set me really up for the next kind of Brandon Sanderson books that I want to delve into, which I believe is the Mistborn trilogy. I think I'm going to go from there. And this is a great standalone. I wish it wasn't a standalone, but also it's probably for the best, because I'm just so bad at reading series. I just never continue them. I would also like to do honourable mentions, just a quick list of them. I'm not going to go through the synopsis and all that kind of stuff. I will let you know what genre it is. These will be books that didn't quite make 5 stars, but were like almost there. Star of Acre by Andrew Michael Hurley. This is a horror book, very folklore, Englishy horror, mystery, dark vibes, not outright horror, but you know, like the threat of the thing horror, which sometimes is scarier. Second honourable mention to The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. Didn't love this one, mainly based on the fact that it felt too long and the story felt so long, but as always, Donna Tartt just has this very magical, distinctive way of writing. It wasn't that long, but I think if it was shorter I would have enjoyed it more. Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. Literary, contemporary, very dark. First Eliza Clark book I'd read, and by God was it a banger. Very strange. Matrix by Lauren Groff, which I listened to. This is about nuns. It's like historical fiction, but it is based on a true person. The audiobook was just delightful. I love a sapphic book with religious overtones that just hits the spot for me. Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. I'm surprised this wasn't in my 5 stars. Maybe that needs to change. This is a sci-fi like thriller fiction book. Hated the cover. Just very, very clever. It's quite an accessible sci-fi as well, I think. If you're into a thriller, quite easy to understand. Lots of reality shifting. Babel by R.F. Kuang. This was so close to a 5 stars for me. I loved this book. Just something so immersive about reading it. Made me want to go off and study some new languages. Academic intrigue, historical fiction, fantasy elements. I just loved that book. The last quarter hadn't lost me, it would have been a clear 5. Honourable mention to Big Swiss. Very weird, very gay. I feel like that's my favourite kind of book. I've read a lot of weird gay books this year. Eileen by Atessa Moshfegh. What the fuck, Eileen? And last honourable mention to Mexican Gothic. I fucking loved that book. It was so bizarre. I was on a bit of a reading slump when I picked it up, which I think why it didn't get higher in the ratings. If you want to read a horror classic, go for that one. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I really enjoyed talking about all of the books that I loved most this year. It's put a real pep in my step. So let me know if you hated any of those. Not too much though. And let me know if you equally loved any of them, or I'd love to hear if you read any of them after seeing the back of my review, because that makes me really proud. My camera battery is about to die. So what I will say is I would love it if you could follow me on Book Talk. I will put all my socials in the description box below. I don't use Goodreads, but I do use Storygraph. So add me as a friend on there and you can see what I'm currently reading. I've already read 3 books in January so far, so I'm feeling really good about myself, feeling on track, feeling enjoyable. If you liked today's video, leave a little thumbs up, maybe a comment or a subscribe if you like my content. I do book reviews every single month. And yeah, that's it really. I upload on every single Sunday and every other Wednesday, so we get 6 videos a month. And yeah, I'll see you on the next upload. Thank you so much for watching.